Before we begin, I just want to point out we had a minor technical issue in this episode. I'm using some new recording software, which for some reason dropped my really nice mic and switched to the mic on my laptop. I have no idea if you can hear a difference. If you care about that sort of thing, my apologies. Given that this episode is about ADHD and embracing your quirks and differences in the way you work and explore the world, we purposely left in some moments where one or both of us, usually me, loses our train of thought and trails off. Anyway, I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, so before we begin, we're here to talk about ADHD, and we both opted out of a test recording. We're doing it live. Hope this works. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. In this bonus episode, book coach and author Vicky Quinn Fraser is back to talk about writing with ADHD. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. Vicky, good to have you back.
Oh, it's fantastic to be back, Charlie. Thank you.
And for folks at home, if there's any kind of anomalies in the recording, I'm trying out some new software, and hopefully there's no bugs. We'll see.
Or we're just giggling at ourselves because that's a very ADHD thing to do.
Right. Yeah. There's already been some like 5 or 6 like very ADHD moments to get to this podcast, including the part where I forgot the time, or I remembered the time when it came up in my calendar. So I guess my like big picture question for you, and we touched on this a little bit on your episode earlier, and that is, well, first of all, to back up for a second, I feel like any conversation around ADHD has to start with kind of some myth busting and clearing the air, because I think it's something where there are a lot of misconceptions and a lot of kind of pop culture definitions of what it even is. So, how might ADHD impact someone's ability to follow through on their goals to write something?
Quite a few ways, I think. So the ways that spring to mind off the top of my head are executive functioning issues. So actually getting started to do something in the first place, which everybody finds difficult from time to time. But oh, that was really echoey. Hang on, there we go.
Yeah, you're good. We could probably cut that. My headphones started being weird.
Oh, okay. So yeah, executive functioning is a really big deal. So actually getting started, which I know everybody struggles with from time to time, but people with ADHD and autism and other, brain stuff like that, neurotypes is the word I was grasping for, they will struggle with it a lot, and it can be very, very difficult. So for me, the executive functioning of, like, for example, my husband will be like, well, it will look to him like I'm on the sofa doom scrolling Instagram, but what's actually happening is inside my head, I'm screaming at myself to get up, you lazy toad, and all sorts of other horrible things that I will say to myself to try and get myself off the sofa and start working. So that's one thing. Another thing I think with finishing things particularly is I want to write about everything all at once, all at the same time. So picking one thing is really, really difficult because I'm like, I'm going to write this and I'm going to write this. And so what I end up with, and I can tell you with no word of a lie, on my hard drive, there's probably about 12 like started or half finished manuscripts that I have started writing and then abandoned for whatever reason. And that is a real problem. Like, it's really difficult because I will get bored of that thing and I will be like, oh, I want to start writing this thing, even though that thing, I might come back to it later, possibly. That is a real big problem for me as well, is that kind of which thing to pick. And then there's just the distraction of, oh, that's a pretty thing out in the garden, I'm just going to go and do that. So yeah, they're the top 3 things, I think.
The one you brought up that I think is oftentimes really hard to deal with and really insidious is the self-esteem element. And this is the part where, because I don't know, I know we live in a time where there is some social capital attached to sympathy and I don't want to say victim status, but like feeling as though like adversity porn or whatever is like a thing on social media. And with ADHD, I try to stay away from that because I think in a lot of ways the symptoms are I don't even like the word symptoms, but like the neurotype, it's kind of benign compared to some other things. And there are actually some tremendous advantages that we can talk about too. But where I think it actually can be really hard is when you go to sit down and write, you're not just up against a system that kind of doesn't give you the little dopamine kick to do what you're supposed to do that most people do, but you're also kind of up against your own track record and self-esteem that might be built on very shaky ground. And I know socially that can be hard with ADHD, because, and I forget, maybe you know the stat, but I know that like by the time someone with ADHD is like 10, they've gotten way more negative feedback than their peers. So it wasn't just like I'm having trouble sitting still to get this thing done. When I sit, it's like I can't sit still, and people have been telling me to sit still and stop talking and all these other things my whole life. I mean, I recently started talking to someone again who shushed me one time. And then I think to most people, shush means I wish you would stop talking right now. But if you've been shushed a lot, it's like...
It's really hurtful.
It's super hurtful. Yeah. So what's going on there? I mean, I guess there needs to be some sort of self-love and kindness in starting off when you're trying to do something hard like write.
Yeah, and this, you know what, this is why I think that, because I've been asked, why did you want to get a diagnosis in the first place? And this, what we're talking about now is one reason why it's so valuable, I think, for some people, because like you say, you get so much negative feedback as a child, and like being a female presenting person, being a woman and a girl when I was a kid, it didn't present in the same way for me, because girls are told to be nice and quiet, and we're socialized differently from boys, and so it didn't really present for me so much with being kind of disruptive, although I was always very, very fidgety and I was always told to sit still and, blah, blah, blah. But my thing would be, stop daydreaming, keep your mind on your work, and what are you doing that for? And looking out the window. And another problem that I had, a massive problem that I had, and I probably say now that I'm going on the journey for an autism diagnosis as well, because I am pretty sure I am also autistic, which the two often go together. But like I was always told, like, look at me when I'm talking to you. And my answer to that would be, I can either look at you or I can listen to you, but I cannot do both. Because so that was another thing, was like there was the constant kind of, how am I supposed to behave? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to be a human in this situation? Because I didn't get that instruction manual that every other kid seems to get at birth. And so there was an awful lot of kind of trying to be the person that I thought everybody wanted me to be, often not managing it or missing the mark because I didn't understand a lot of the social stuff. And so there would be all of that feedback from adults telling me, you're not working hard enough, you're not trying hard enough, or sometimes, oh, you're so gifted. So that there was that kind of, dual confusing message as well. And pay attention, you're not paying attention. And I'm like, well, that's very boring, so I don't want to pay attention. And so there was all of this stuff, and you kind of internalize it all. And then when you're an adult and you're trying to write, you've just always got these voices in your head. Like I remember saying to my husband a few years ago, it's like, I didn't realize that when people say they're lazy, it means that can't be bothered to do something. And when I said I was lazy, I would be like, I've been trying to do this thing for hours and I literally can't do it. And I did not realize that there were those two different meanings for like people. Do you know what I mean? So I was just like, oh, I'm really lazy. And so that has been a real internal monologue for me. It's like, you're lazy because you're not doing the things that you want to do. And I did not understand that other people's definition of the word lazy was not the same as mine. So yeah, there's all this kind of internal stuff that just beats you down. You're trying to write.
And I guess then the question some people might be asking is, why write in the first place? I've asked myself that sometimes, because it's like I've signed up for homework for the rest of my life, and I hated homework. But do you think that ADHD in some ways like led you to writing, or made you connect with writing in a special way?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche that people with different neurotypes are quite creative in lots of different ways, like science and woodworking and engineering stuff as well. But I think it's true, because I was reading some research, and I need to dig further into this. But like Temple Grandin as well, so the very famous autistic scientist, said that like without people with different neurotypes, everybody, like humanity, would still be gossiping in a cave. Because you've got like all of these different people you've got the person who is like really hyper focused and nerdy about berries, and they know all of the different berries, what's going to kill you, what's going to be medicine. And like that was the person in the tribe way back when that people would go to for that kind of advice. And then you've got like the ADHD people who would be like, oh, what's over that hill? And so that's when, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, what's that? What does that do? And so you've got all of these different kind of neurotypes, and in a typical ADHD way, I've totally forgotten where this sentence started. Yeah, writing. Okay, so yeah, I think it has helped because I'm one of those really irritating children who taught themselves to read before they went to school. And was always into books. So my brain would escape into books, and it would like create all of these different worlds, and it would read about these different worlds, and I would literally disappear into them. Like I've always had a little bit of trouble separating fantasy from reality in that sense. So like when I watch a film that I love, it becomes very real to me. And I just love the idea of being able to, like, that to me, that's magic. Like that's writing, that's magic. And so I want to be able to do that. Like that is a thing that I want to be able to do. I want to be able to use my words to create a different world. And it was just another way of being creative and doing things with my hands and my brain, I guess. So I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, I mean, God, there's so much there that totally resonates. I mean, even if you just get into the history of ADHD and sort of the impact of neurodiversity on, I mean, Temple Grandin's an amazing example. I remember there's that book Mastery by Robert Greene about just the phenomenon of becoming good at something, and he has like, I think, multiple chapters about her. But yeah, or you read about, because I was always really into history, and I was always really into the history of exploration. And I mean, if you look at people like Shackleton, Mallory, I mean, and you read especially their full biographies and what they were like as kids. And I mean, this is obviously someone with ADHD. I mean, John F. Kennedy was treated for ADHD, and you look at someone whose personal life was chaotic in a lot of ways, but did really well being shipwrecked in the war and saving the world from nuclear annihilation. Ditto Churchill. Dude never slept and was like painting frantically, but was calm when everybody else was thinking that like panic was sort of the only option. And there's, I don't want to put too much stock in that, especially when we don't have, there's a lot of factors that can go into, but it is really interesting to think about. And, even I look at people I know with ADHD who, like, they're the person you would want around if something was on fire. And then they might be kind of annoying when things are sort of fine.
Do you know what? I was just thinking that. It's like my brain will panic and get anxiety. Like, and this is a really good example. This is slightly off tangent, but I think it's a good example for people who are like, well, I think everybody's a little bit ADHD, or really annoying phrase like that. But like the other day, my husband was laughing at me because I had a thing in each hand and I needed to pick something up. And I just spun in the kitchen. I spun gently. I was like, what is, it's like, just put one thing down and pick the other thing up. But like my brain could not cope with that. And I got really anxious about it and panicked. And it's like, that's the kind, but put me in a crisis and I will be fine. I will solve that crisis. I will be absolutely calm. It's just like, that is kind of the superpower and the disability of the whole thing is like, yes, I will be calm in a crisis, but also why can my brain not let me put something down and pick another thing up? It's like, what is that about?
Yeah. And it's that, if this was harder, I could do it. But
yeah,
but also you bring up something really interesting there too that I think is super relevant to writing, and that is an ability to kind of hold on. And it's in that same book on skill and creativity. There's this theory that certain people, like most people, define growing up as jettisoning a childlike way of looking at the world and behaving. And to some extent, like if you hold on to all of that, you'll, like if you're just a grown-up baby, you probably won't go far in life. But certain people, you can really attribute their creative contributions to an ability to retain imagination and playfulness and exploration and all those things. And I can just remember, I mean, even like when I look at, studying English, and I was an English major in college, and everyone else was either going to go to law school or become a teacher. And I was kind of like, well, somebody wrote all these books that we read, and to me seems a little more exciting. And there was kind of a naivete of like, that I could just go do that. And kind of like wanting to be an explorer or something like that. And I don't know. I think, and especially elder millennials, and I think Gen X, it's even worse. But I'm not Gen X, so I don't know. But there is that in indifference is maybe the wrong word. Like an attitude of, help me out here. It's like pretending you don't care about things, or that
Yeah.
you're. In my experience, those of us with ADHD, and I think probably the same with autism, like you kind of can't pretend not to care, even
Yeah.
if it's supposed to be. And I don't know, like I look at some of the outdoor activities I do. There are plenty of people who engage in those in a very moderate way, where it's kind of like, well, I'm not gonna, like, I'll go kayaking, but it's just to kind of look at the scenery for a couple hours or whatever. And for me, it's like I'm gonna live out of a kayak for a month. And like, I mean, and it's not always positive. Like, it's been 10 years since I've drank, but I was the same way about drinking. It was like, why would we have a beer when we could drink till we're sick? But I don't know. I think that and again, when you look at the lives of people who've made tremendous creative contributions, oftentimes you do have that duality where there's an immoderate sort of childishness that makes them great at creating, but that it can also, I think I read that Dylan Thomas's wife had to like create a trail of like candies to get him to take a bath, to like lead him to the tub.
I've never heard that, but now I'm gonna go on a wormhole and find out about that, because that's like, and then I'm like, oh, but then I'm like, is that just an excuse for a dude to just be really shit? Because I think sometimes that is the thing that happens as well. But yeah, you're right though. It's like, I remember reading the whole, oh, it's time to put away childish things, that quote. And I was like, but why though? Like, I think hanging on to that childlike wonder is the way I think of it. That childlike, because like I can still, like, I'm looking out of my window now and there is sunshine on wet leaves and I'm like, oh my God, so gorgeous. And I will go out and I will look at the raindrops on the leaves after this call and I'll have a look. So it's like a whole little universe in there. And then there's like little tiny microorganisms as well. And so that kind of childlike wonder of being like really interested in everything and noticing everything as well, I think is really a trait of ADHD and autism. And that, all of that is like, well, how does it work? Like, why? And really, like you said, really, really caring about it as well. So, I mean, writing has always been like special interest, as it's somewhat condescendingly called. But I've had other things as well. Like, I was obsessed with climbing for years, and the mechanics of climbing and like, how does this work and what's the best way to do it and what's the technique. So it wasn't just like, I'm just going to go climbing for a bit. I wasn't competitive or anything, but it's like, how can I get really good at this? And it's the same with trapeze and pole. Is like, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. So when I'm teaching it, okay, you don't get this. How else can I explain it? What else can I do? Like, are the cues? What is my body doing? What are the muscles doing? And all of that interesting stuff. And that has made me realize that actually most people never give a second thought to what their body is doing or how their muscles work. Because I'll be like, oh, can you just engage this muscle? And they're like, how do you do that? And I'm like, how are you still upright? So do you know what I mean? It's like, it's just like really interested in like the small details of the thing that you're interested in, and kind of making it a whole universe, I think, is a real ADHD superpower.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that too, about being in motion. I find that being in water or on water can have such a sort of soothing effect. And again, it can oftentimes be an environment where most people are uncomfortable or nervous, but it actually has a soothing effect. There's a great podcast that I'll mention just for anyone who has seen the documentary The Alpinist, about I'm going to butcher his name, Marc-Andre Leclerc, who Free Solo with Alex Hahn, the rock climber. Now imagine basically doing that on like ice and mountains, but the same
no thank you.
Right. So it's a documentary about him, and there is a podcast, and it's an ADHD podcast interview with his mother, and it's pretty interesting. And she talks about some of the things she was told by doctors about that he basically had this like adrenaline saturation to where that on like a brain chemistry level made everyday life like incredibly uncomfortable and anxiety inducing. But then he would sort of find his balance dangling off an ice face by the
Yeah.
tip of an
That's
ice axe.
really interesting. I'm gonna have to go and listen to that because like I live in such a high level of anxiety all the time for like everyday stuff, and it's debilitating and exhausting. But like when I'm doing something like you said, like I love swimming in the sea as long as the sea is flat because I get really anxious about big waves because I nearly drowned when I was a child. But like I love swimming in cold water because it's just like you said, quiets everything, and there's that kind of level of adrenaline that's like, oh, I might drown here. And the trapeze that I do as well, it's like there's always an element of danger with that, and it's thinky. I have to think my way through things. I'm trying something new, and this is really scary. And how is all of this working? And it is like I've never really thought of it like that before, but like I don't feel anxious when I'm doing those things, and that's really interesting.
Bringing it back to writing, and trapeze sounds absolutely awesome, by the way.
It's cool.
That's really cool.
It's very cool.
And that's another, just a little sidebar. I mean, again, I'm looking at myself, but also friends and people I know with ADHD. There does seem to be a thing with kind of gross motor skills. Like I was like bad at anything with a ball in school to the point of like being made fun of.
Yeah.
Again,
Same.
on that sort of hyper rejection experience. But then I would, things like swimming, where you're not actually having to make dainty little movements with your hands or whatever. You're kind of using your whole body and big muscle groups. Ditto weightlifting, and it's I don't know. I've just seen that again and again to be a thing.
Yeah. And also I'm like, I don't know about you, but I'm like super clumsy. And so people are really surprised when I'm so good at trapeze because I bang into stuff. Like I'm covered in bruises from trapeze, but I'm also covered in bruises and broken pockets and belt loops from just bashing into things and like banging my head when I stand up and bashing my elbow and catching pockets on things. Yet I drop stuff all the time, dropping stuff all the time. And my proprioception is terrible. But you put me on a trapeze or get me to dance and it's a totally different story. Like it's totally different, and I just find that so bizarre.
And I guess, I mean, that sounds so familiar. Yeah, I'm quite clumsy myself, and but not in the water, crucially. And yeah, it's funny how that works and how, and I forgot what I was gonna say. But no, it is really funny how that works and how like you kind of almost need that level of challenge or engagement or what have you.
Yeah.
I guess you find like flying through the air.
Yeah.
And I find where I see it with like cognitive skills. This is what I was gonna say. Math was the one I like could not do math in school, and I was interested enough and kind of good enough at things like English and foreign languages to where I did quite well at them, in spite of not being great at school generally. But then weirdly, like the math involved in navigation at sea is extremely complicated, and the you could really get into trouble for making even small errors. And weirdly, I find it very stimulating and interesting, and it spatially makes sense to me, even though it's.
But you know what? That's the
not
thing
easy.
though, because that's a practical reason for doing it, and so you need to like. I think I don't like. I struggle certainly with abstract. I mean, all humans struggle with abstract concepts, but like for me, I was terrible at maths. I wasn't terrible at maths, but I wasn't good at maths, and it's not a language that I can understand or speak very well. But if you give me a reason to be able to solve something, then I will work on it. But if you're just trying to teach it, so I think maybe that's the same with navigation. It's like you need to be able to use that math to navigate like without, being lost at sea or whatever. So you've got a reason to do it.
Yep. And that goes to what you're saying about laziness too, right? Like I think that's a big misconception, is that you somehow want to get off easy or something, but actually it's like the hyper focus can put you in this place where you actually are going to be kind of more engaged and harder working. But so what would you recommend? And I know you actually do this like professionally. You help all sorts of people, not just people with ADHD, but for someone with ADHD, how can I develop a writing practice that works for me? Because and let me preface this with something, and maybe you agree with this, maybe you don't, but I feel like there are certain non-negotiables where you're the one who has to adapt. And to me, in writing, one of those is a regular practice. You can't just write haphazardly when the mood strikes. You just
No.
the physics of how making a book works, you'll just never get it. And then, like you said, you'll flit away to the next project, and and then you'll have a bunch of false starts. But on the other hand, it works the other way. If you have the discipline to just write a page every day, you will reliably write a book pretty much every year, and you could write dozens of books in the time you have left. But how do you get there? So anyway, first of all, do you agree that you do need a regular writing practice? There's no exceptions.
100% agree with that. Yeah. And I think a lot of people struggle with that as well, with especially creative people. They're like, oh, I'm really creative, I don't need like a schedule. And I'm like, if you don't give me boundaries and a framework, then I will do nothing or everything, which is the same thing. So it's, you have to have a practice and a discipline for it. It has to work, but it doesn't have to be somebody else's practice and discipline. So that's the first thing that I always say to my clients is spend a week or so observing your energy and, at different times of the year, at different times of the day, at different times of your hormone cycle, if you're a woman, like look at where your energy is. Like, when do you feel most creative and most like doing something? Because if you try and force yourself to do it when you don't want to, you're going to get nowhere. It's going to be very, very frustrating. So it's like, if you do your best work at 4 a.m., then do your best work at 4 a.m., if you are able to do so. If you do your best work at mid-afternoon, which I do not understand how anyone could do that. Who can do that?
Yeah, look, sorry, just have to jump in there for a second. Okay, so I know there are morning people. I'm a morning person. There's people where writing time is in the morning, and there's night owls. So, I mean, there's at the most extreme I've seen is people where it's like midnight to 6 a.m. is writing time.
Yeah.
Why is it the afternoon? Like, what is? Because I straight up don't believe people when they tell me that like 2:30 is when they get things done.
I know 2:30 is when I am half comatose. Like, seriously, I think partly it's because we eat lunch, and so your body is like digesting, and there's like that's where all the energy goes, and it's called the mid-afternoon slump, isn't it? And partly, I don't know, if you've been up all day, you're just tired by then. It's like you've just done a lot of stuff, and there's only so much stuff your brain can do. And that's the other thing that I would say is, like, when you're looking at your energy, don't think that you can schedule in a 6-hour writing stretch, because that's ridiculous. Like, maybe you will start writing and you will carry on for that long if you really, really get into it. But if you schedule in like a massive chunk of time, then I don't know about you, but I will look at that and be like, well, that's not a thing that I want to do. I can't sit still for that long. I might do, like, at some point, because I have been known to write for a whole day because I've just got really into it. But I would never really plan to do that. So it's like, look at where your energy is and how you feel throughout the day, and where you work best. And if you're able to schedule your day around it most of the time, then that's what I would say to do. And also for me, like, I really struggle with, I mean, we talked about this in the podcast, but I literally wrote a book called Don't Eat the Frog, because that's terrible advice for people like me, is like, do the biggest thing first. So make it so small you can't fail. Like, make it so small you can't fail, and start there, and then see what happens. Like, don't schedule. So I'm just looking at my day to day. I've got quite a few calls. I wouldn't really try and fit any serious writing in between that, because there's not enough time and there's too much else going on. So it's kind of look at what you have going on and how you can make it really small, but also leave yourself enough space to carry on if you've done, because momentum is physics, right? You start it and it's easier to keep going. It's much easier to keep going than it is to start something in a brain or in mechanics. And so yeah, like, find that time that works for you. Make it so small you can't fail. Give yourself space to carry on if you want to. And for God's sake, don't try and fit writing in around everything else, because you will never write anything ever. It's like everything expands to fill the available space. So unless you schedule your writing somewhere, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that's all so good. Those seem to be the key elements. I don't know if there's even anything I would add to that. It seems to me, interruption is pretty serious. If let's say you have a day full of email and calls, you get interrupted. A 10-minute interruption when you're answering email will cost you about 10 minutes. But a 10-minute interruption in the middle of a writing period that might be the day kind of gone, or it might take you an hour to get back to where you were.
I think there's actually research on this, and it's like, a couple of minutes interruption is not. It can take like 30 or 40 minutes to get back on track again. And so that's my other piece of advice, which is really good that you brought that up, is turn everything off. Like, my phone is not even in this cabin. Like, my phone is in the house, because if my phone is, and they've done research on this as well, like if you can see your phone, it sucks your attention. So like bury it in a hole in the ground, like if you have to. Turn your email off. Like, I never have my email on in the background. Turn your notifications off. Nothing is that urgent. I can't. Joe works from home as well. I will go in and he's constantly like bing, bing, bing. And I'm like, oh my God, like how? So yeah, turn off all of the distractions. Put a sign on your door that says, under no circumstances come in here or I will cut you. That kind of things.
Yeah. What's the thing from Almost Famous? Like, do not disturb ever.
Yeah, just don't.
That's really solid advice, and kind of thinking of it as an appointment with yourself in some ways.
Yeah, treat yourself like a client. Like, you wouldn't flake out on a client, so don't flake out on yourself. It's like, put it in there as if you are a client or, a meeting with somebody.
Speaking of flaking out, I think, again, and I want to ask you, because this came up on the last podcast, I want to ask you about all or nothing thinking. But it seems to me that one easy area of improvement for folks with ADHD is learning to let things that kind of don't matter or aren't very important, maybe they're urgent, but they're not important, to either like delegate those things, let them slide, put them off. Like, if you're, I think the real tragedy, and I have seen this with people who end up just kind of doing nothing with their life, and it's actually horrible, and it's something my fear of this kind of keeps me going sometimes, and that is that you would procrastinate and put off the things that matter in favor of box ticking and keeping up with your inbox and paperwork and stuff that nobody cares about. You won't look back on fondly. You're not going to wish you had more time to have done that when, if you got some awful diagnosis.
No, and they've done research on, like, I'm a research machine today. They've done research on this as well. It's like, deathbed regret is never, ever anything other than, I wish I had had the courage to live the life I wanted to live and do the things that are important to me. Like, that is almost 100%, I think, the deathbed regret things. It's never, I wish I'd answered more emails. It's never even, I wish I'd made more money. It's always the being true to yourself kind of thing, and that kind of thing. And you've just reminded me as well, I'm reading at the moment Cal Newport's Slow Productivity book.
Oh, I have that. I haven't read it yet. Is it good?
It's so good. Yeah, I mean, everything he writes is great, but yeah, it's so good because I just feel like it's almost accidentally a manifesto for people with ADHD as well, or people who want to, especially for writers. It's like, and I'm trying to do this well because I have a real problem with, like you say, getting caught up with the small things. I'm like, I send an email every day, therefore I always have to send an email every day. Is that all or nothing thinking again? And I'm like, part of my brain is like, well, why? Why do you have to, like, why don't you change it? Just because you've always done it doesn't mean you always have to do it. And so I'm trying to really kind of pull myself out of that and be like, if I want to send an email every day, and I've been doing that this week, I can recycle old stuff that I wrote years ago and then spend my week working on one piece that is really good, like going a bit deeper into something and kind of working that way. So the all or nothing thing is a real problem, I think, for neurodivergent people, because we get fixated on stupid small stuff, but also it's like, oh, if I haven't done any writing, it's 2 p.m. and I haven't done any writing, and therefore the whole day is a bust. It's like, I could write for 5 minutes now, but my brain is like, nope, you've wasted the day. And it's like, well, I could write for 5 minutes now.
And like, by the way, I suck. And this is more evidence.
Yes, I'm lazy, I suck, I'm useless, all of that stuff that we say to ourselves that we would never say to anybody else. So, yeah.
I've been in that position where I was sort of mentoring someone who's struggling with exactly what you describe. And I was like, would you talk to somebody else would you let someone else talk to you like this? Like why are you, and but something I want to come back to Cal Newport because I think deep work is such an amazing tool, and I want to get into that. But first, like going kind of to what you said about special interests and the really positive side of fixation on minutia is I think sometimes ADHD gives people courage or as like Siobhan would say, like a permission slip to like be a total nerd. And again, I think about like this moderation kind of making me sick of, people like, oh yeah, I get some exercise to keep the pounds off. It's like, no. Like we're pumping iron until the voice in the head gets quiet. Like, we're I feel like ultra marathons were invented for people with ADHD. But do you think that actually developing a talent in writing to the point where you can make a living doing it could be a like ADHD properly managed could contribute to that? Because you actually, going back to that holding on to childhood daydreams, that you would actually have the courage to follow through and to stick with it and to focus the way you need to focus, where other people might be content to keep something at arm's length as a hobby.
Yeah, and I think curiosity has a lot to do with it as well. And I think that's because it's really hard, because when you first start, and I don't know why for writing this is different, but I think it is. I think because everybody's taught to write as a kid. So everybody kind of comes into it with this idea that I should be able to do this. And it's like, well, you can string words together. If you're literate, then you can write something. It doesn't make you a good writer. And I think that's the thing. It's like there's this big disconnect. People are like, well, I can write, so why is this thing that I've just written shit? And it's like, because you haven't put like the work into it yet. And this is what I'm always telling people is like, the first draft of anything you do ever is going to be shit. That's just the way it is. And that's okay. And it's like the key is to kind of look at it and go, well, why? Why is this not very good? How could it be better? And it's that getting curious thing about it again. It's like letting go of the judgment. Like, judge yourself for 5 minutes if you have to, whatever. I do. But then I'm like, okay, well, how can I make this better? Because for me, the failure is when you go, oh, this is shit and I'm done and I can't be bothered anymore, because that is a terrible thing. But if you're coming at it and you care enough, or people say they care, it's like, I'm going to look at what you do, not what you say. It's like, if you care about it, then look at it and think, okay, why? And then how can I get better? And then what technique is that writer over there, like David Sedaris? I love his writing so much. And I'm like, I kind of want to be him when I grow up, except I want to be me, but him. But it's like, okay, well, what is he doing with his writing? Like, how is he constructing his sentences? But even more than that, where are his ideas coming from? Because that's the important thing. It's not even technique. Like, you can get nerdy about technique, and I do get nerdy about technique because I love like kind of craft of writing. But I'm more interested in, where do these people get their ideas? Like, how does David Sedaris write about the things he writes about? And it's because he's curious about literally everything and everybody, and he just notices stuff. And if you start there, then you will never be bored in your life ever. So I get really frustrated when I hear people say, oh, I'm really bored. I'm like, literally look at the world. Like, honestly, how can you? And then use that. And it's like, what are you interested in today? Oh, camel humps. Okay, go write about camel humps. And what is a camel hump? Not water, it's fat. Anyway, so yeah, all of those little things. It's like, get interested about every aspect of writing, and that's how you become good at it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's a funny, weird usefulness to self-criticism and self-doubt in editing. Because that is one area where telling yourself this sucks, assuming it doesn't stop you in your tracks, is actually a useful exercise, because you kind of should bring that. And then as you develop the craft and you learn kind of sophisticated ways of understanding what you mean when you say something that doesn't work. And I've always found with editing other people's work, or as a reader, some people love reading just for the sake of reading, and they can read anything, and they just. But I've always found reading to be so difficult that I don't have to pretend that I'm not really, like, I'm out. Like, if you lose my attention for a single sentence, I'm kind of done. It's really clear to me what's not working when I read something as an editor, because those bumps in the road make it so hard to continue.
Yeah, I think that can be really useful. And I think another, So you probably know quite a lot more about editing than I do, but like one of the things that I do with my clients, and I think this stops you, and I do it with myself as well. It's like sometimes we'll write something, it's the whole kill your darlings thing, right? And it's like, this is, you look at it, this is rubbish. It's like, but this bit isn't. But in the context of the wider thing, this is rubbish because it doesn't fit. And so I'm like, well, take it out, put it over there, use it in something else. You don't have to kill it forever. And so I find that a really useful thing as well in that kind of self-criticism thing. It's like, okay, you can like it and it can not be good in this context. And so you don't have to use it in this context, but also you don't have to annihilate it. It's like you can take bits and pieces. And I always found that to be very useful for my own writing. It's like, your ego gets in the way, whatever. Okay, cool. Take it, put it over there. And then sometimes I come back to it and I'm like, oh, that actually was total rubbish. And then sometimes I come back and I'm like, actually, that's the beginning of the next piece I'm going to write because, that's where I'll start with that. So yeah, the whole self-criticism thing for editing, I think is really, really helpful because we need to have that honesty. And I think, maybe for people with brains like ours, it sometimes goes too far the other way. Like, when we go past honesty and into mean, which is not helpful about our own stuff. But if we can keep that, real critical eye, I think that the people who produce the best writing are very self-critical, but in a kind of constructive way rather than a destructive way.
Yeah, that's a God, I'm cringing thinking of times where I've crossed that line into meanness. But certainly, I think that's definitely true. And again, there's a difference between keeping it real and just being negative and contrary and not offering anything.
Yeah.
Now you brought up Cal Newport and found deep work is kind of amazing. Is that something that you have? And first of all, for listeners, how would you summarize? I'm trying to think of how to describe it. I mean, it's one of those things that's like oddly simple, but if it was simple, everyone would be doing it.
Yeah. It is, you're right. It's like a simple concept, but then you try and explain it to people and it's like, I don't know, it's just deep work. What? So I think it's giving yourself space and permission to just really spend a lot of time on one thing and pushing through the boredom of it as well. Because this is another thing, like if you want to get really good at something, you have to get comfortable with being bored because at some point you're going to be bored by what you're doing because it's always very repetitive. So I don't know if you, and we can apply this to writing books and writing any kind of big piece. It's like you have to have a really important reason for doing it. I think for yourself, whatever that reason is, it has to be really, really important because that's why I've got like 10 abandoned manuscripts on my computer. They weren't important enough to me to bother finishing, which is fine. It's just fine. I don't want to waste my time on something. But if you find a really, really good reason to do something, then you will push through the boredom on the times when you're bored and just keep at it. And that's when you can get to that real like curiosity, I think. And I wonder if this is, because it's been a while since I read deep work. I can't remember if Cal Newport talks about this, but like pushing through the boredom and then getting really curious about what's going on there. Like, why is it boring? Okay, how can I make this not boring? What's going on? What do I need to do next? Looking at it from different angles. And that's the thing. So I think a lot of people just go at it in one direction and then they hit a roadblock and then they give up, and that's why it's difficult. But I think what I do is I'll hit the roadblock and then I'll walk around and look at it from a different angle. It's like, okay, well, if I can't do it this way, maybe I can do it this way, or maybe I can start at the end. Like maybe I can write a different chapter, or maybe I can write the back blurb, or maybe I can go back to my outline. Like there's 1,000 different things that you can do. And for me, I think that's the deep work aspect of it, is like committing to doing the thing in whatever way works best for you, but like doing the thing.
Do the thing. Vicky, that's probably a great place to end it. Thank you so much for talking to me. I hope people got something out of this. And, I would definitely recommend people should read Don't Eat the Frog if they are curious about kind of the practical side, and then also some of the research behind some of the things you're saying. So thanks again. You'll have to come back again soon. Always great to talk to you.
This has been awesome, as usual. Thank you so much.
If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailyprose.com or on LinkedIn. My links and Vicky's are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.